creativity involves breaking out of established patterns in order to look at things in a different way. Edward DeBono. Welcome, I'm David McGinnis, and this is Deep Dive Creatives, a podcast that explores the creative process. If you would take a moment to hit that subscribe or follow button, that is a great encouragement to me and will let you know when the next episode is available. Meet Michelle Bruhn.
I figure out that one of those particular items was really, really dumb. I'll just throw that away. I'm like, silly Michelle of 2 months ago. Laughter is very important for the creative process.
Michelle is a young adult fantasy author whose stories focus on outcasts, hard questions, and hope. Michelle is currently finishing up a book series titled The Dragon Singer Chronicles. Michelle had this to say about her book series.
First book is very focused on Elisa learning to appreciate and empower dragons, and her song gives them flight, therefore Songflight. Storm Dance was all about finding music in the mess, or as Folier talks about, finding it in the storm. And so Storm Dance, as they're going through just problem after problem after problem in that book, and learning to find the joy even in the midst of that circumstance. And Soul Flame is very much about the character's relationship to the maker, the God character, and how he keeps their soul's flame alight in the midst of adversity.
Well, if you are a fan of Aragon or the Dragon Riders of Pern, or perhaps the How to Train Your Dragon movies, you will definitely enjoy this book series. You can purchase those books by visiting michellembruin.com/all-books. Michelle is passionate about seeing through others' eyes and helping her readers do the same, especially through characters with diverse life experiences. She finds joy in understanding others and knows far too much about personality theories and binge-watches TED Talks on a regular basis. She spends the rest of her free time making and listening to music, walking, reading, and snuggling with her cats. My wife, Tamara McGinnis, a university language arts professor who teaches writing courses and who has been a longtime friend of Michelle, sat down with her to discuss the topic of creativity. As Michelle unpacks her thoughts about writing books and the creative process, I'm convinced you will be encouraged as you venture down your own wild path of creativity. Let's dive in.
So if we were to ask you how you define creativity, what would you say?
That's a big question.
I think entire books have been written about this.
Yes.
But if you could limit it to maybe paragraphs.
Yes, yes. So knowing that anything's, like even a book that's all about it is going to have holes in it, I think that what I would define creativity as is using one's imagination to create something new. And that's really, really, really broad. And it's kind of on purpose because I've heard a lot of people say, like when they hear what I do, like, oh, it's so cool, you're so creative. I'm just not the creative type. I think that's wrong.
Yes.
I think that it's impossible to not have any creativity. God is so creative, and we're created in his image. And now creativity has kind of been defined in our culture as artsy stuff. So the writing, the music, the painting, the what have you. But I see art in architecture, or in how mathematicians and scientists use math and science to solve problems. Or even just like, if you've made a recipe the same way over and over and over again, and you want to add something new to it. I think that's creative. Using one's imagination to create something new is how I define creativity.
What is your personal creative process? How do you go from just your everyday regular life to, okay, I'm going to sit down and create this book?
I get a lot of my ideas. In fact, the majority of my ideas from other people's creations. I spend a lot of time reading books, listening to music, watching movies and TV. Just for my own fun, but then also knowing that that's where I tend to get the seeds of ideas for characters or for storylines. It's a lot of what if questions, like with the fan fiction that turned into my first book, Songflight. I looked at Anne McCaffrey's Dragon Riders of Bruhn, where there are telepathic dragon riders and dragons, and where music and oral storytelling are a huge part of the world. And I looked at that and I thought, okay, but what if there were a harper, one of those song weaver people, who could communicate with the dragons through her songs? Wouldn't that be cool? And then write down that idea and think it through in my brain, write down like maybe a scene that came to my mind. And then listening to music is also like, I get the what ifs typically from movies, books, TV. But then once I've got that what if question, development comes primarily through music. I'll just kind of turn on Spotify or back then I would just put on a CD and listen to songs until a lyric hit me. And I'd think, that is that character. That is absolutely that character. And I'd compile playlists, basically, and I'd listen to them over and over again. And sometimes, eventually, a character morphs so much that one of the songs doesn't work anymore. But the bare bones of characters typically come through music for me. A huge part of the creative process for me is also outlining, which I'm going to turn off some writers by saying that. I have very dear friends who write by the seat of their pants, and it's perfectly valid. Stephen King, I think all of his stuff is not outlined because then he feels like if he does the outline, he's already written the story. I don't feel that way. I need structure, because if I stare at a blank page on my computer and just watch the blinking cursor without a plan, I just freeze up. I can't do it. I absolutely can't do it. So I take all those ideas that I had, all those songs, all those lyrics, all those what if questions, and I organize them and I figure out the plan. Or if I've already done the outline for a book, I'll grab that little piece of the outline and then I'll kind of expand that before I start actually writing the scene that is there for the day. Because that's just how my brain works.
What do you like best about the creative process? What keeps you coming back?
My favorite part of the creative process is definitely that brainstorming part where I'm searching for ideas and then trying to piece them together like a jigsaw puzzle. So that's a part of what keeps me coming back. The other part is my characters, because during that process, many of them become real people to me. Like they live in my brain. And I want to finish their stories and I want to watch them grow, figure out how they're going to grow. I care a lot about them and I want to see that through.
When you said brainstorming, I enjoy the most. What is it about that that's rewarding to you? What is it that brings you pleasure and joy? And why is the rest of it a little harder?
That's a very good question. I think a big part of why brainstorming is the most enjoyable part for me it's not necessarily the new idea popping up everywhere, but it's the fitting them together like a puzzle. And a lot of times, brainstorming, you're just saying anything that comes to mind at that point. And some of the ideas might be stupid, and some of them you might not know that they're stupid in the moment. But as you start fitting the pieces together and seeing like, oh, that idea about what this character is going to learn actually fits really well with this part of the plot, and I hadn't figured that out before. Those fit together. And this part is kind of getting in the way, so we're just going to toss that out. At that point, it's not nearly as difficult to kill my darlings. And so that moment where it's like all of these seemingly disjointed pieces fit together is extremely fulfilling. Like, sometimes I'll literally figure that out and then just start laughing to myself with like the joy that fills me in that moment, because it's actually going to work. It's going to work. So yeah.
It's always a good thing.
Yes. I'll also laugh when I figure out that one of those particular items was really, really dumb. I'll just throw that away. I'm like, silly Michelle of 2 months ago. Laughter is very important for the creative process.
That's a good point, actually. It's a coping mechanism.
Yes.
Yes. Not bad. So do you enjoy the actual process of putting all of those thoughts onto paper?
I do sometimes. Sometimes it's really, really, really hard work. But it's the knowing that their story, the story that God has for me to tell about them, is not done yet. That will make me come back even when it's really, really hard and that cursor's just blinking.
A very famous writer at one point said, "I hate writing, I love having written."
Yes, I've heard that one, and I agree 100%.
Closure.
Yes.
So as you begin your creative process, what kind of environment do you have to have around you for you to be able to flourish and produce what you need to produce?
I have had to learn to not be picky.
Ooh.
I often write in my 15-minute breaks at work or on my lunch break.
Oh, wow.
When I'm in my office and there are other people around me and I have to block it out, I'll put in earphones. A lot of the times it has to be quiet. I know a lot of writers who write to music. I have a really hard time doing that, being a musician myself. I'll get caught up in the music and forget to write. But if it's really loud, maybe I'll turn on some really soft instrumental music, Celtic music, because I'm currently writing a more Celtic feeling book. But as far as like what my environment looks like, I prefer to have a really cozy environment, like surrounded by blankets and pillows. I'll often write in bed, but I have had to learn that I have to be able to write even if things aren't perfect, because otherwise I won't get it done. And working a full-time job and writing on the side, I have to be able to get work done wherever I can.
So sometimes people think of the creative process as this instinctive, ungovernable kind of thing. And as I listen to you, I'm hearing discipline.
Yes, for me, the answer is discipline. And again, if I can choose my environment, awesome. It's helpful. It's certainly helpful. But yeah, for me, it's definitely had to be a disciplined, I will write at this time for this long, however many words I can get out. If I can only get one sentence out during my 15-minute break, might be disappointing, but at least I did something. Brian Davis's Dragons in Our Midst series was a huge inspiration to me. He has a couple of characters who feel that they are called for more or want to do more, but God has them in a waiting period. And they feel abandoned, like he's forgotten them and left them to just rot. And not get to live this exciting adventure that all of their friends and family are off doing. And reading those characters in my boring little homeschool girl life, I love my life, by the way, but there were times where it felt kind of like, well, shouldn't I be doing more? And where is God in where I am right now? And those really encouraged me in that point in my life. And fantasy's always done that for me. So because it's what I enjoy, and because I know that it can be impactful just as much as a self-help book or a theology book or even like a historical book, it's where I've kind of decided to plant my flag.
When you find yourself faced with that blank page and you have no idea what to say and nothing is coming, what do you do to overcome that block?
Typically, the biggest help for me is getting outside and going on a walk. I use my brain for my day job because I'm not a full-time writer. I wish one day. But I use my brain for that. And I use my brain for writing, and I don't use my body a whole heck of a lot. And what I found is that when I focus on the body and let my brain rest for a little bit, so much works out. So much works out. So yeah, I mean, it's not always possible to go out for a walk here in the good old Pacific Northwest, but I do my best. I also have a treadmill at home that sometimes I'll use, so.
There's actually a quote that I tell my speech students, free the body, free the mind.
Yes, and that's it.
If you start moving your body, oddly enough, things begin to fire in your brain. It's fascinating. Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. I might be making an assumption here with this question, but what do you learn from the creative works that don't work out? So I assume that at some point you've started something or you tried to create a certain character or a certain situation, and no matter what you did, you just couldn't make it work. What do you do with that?
Yeah, that's one of the hardest parts of writing for me, honestly, is killing my darlings is what is what it's called in the biz. Where you have a scene that I really like, but that doesn't serve the story, or a character that's redundant or really just doesn't do anything. Then I'm like, oh, but they make that great joke right there, and I want that joke so badly, and it doesn't make sense for any of the other characters to say it. So yeah, that's hard. One of my favorite authors, Brandon Sanderson, I'm going to paraphrase him. I don't know the exact quote, but he said that the book is not the product. The author is the product. And what he means by that is basically that as you write, as you make your art, because I think it can apply beyond just writing, you are growing. And even if something that you've worked really hard on doesn't pan out business-wise, it has still taught you about your craft. It has still taught you about yourself, probably. And it's not a waste, even if it needs to be put away. And when I do take out those scenes that I really, really love, I do put them in a special folder where they're not lost. I can come back and read them and laugh at that joke myself, even if no one else ever gets to see it. But yeah, the product is you. The one that God is growing through the artistic process is you. And I think that's really cool. It is.
And with that file, there may be a place in another book.
Exactly.
You could work that back in.
Yes.
You don't have to kill your darlings, you just have to put them in a room.
Yes. Go to your room.
Stay there.
Out. I'll let you out in a few years.
Do you have a personal philosophy that governs your creative process, productions, efforts?
Empathy. And that's in two different ways. The first is that when I write my characters, at least the primary and secondary characters, I, as the author, need to make sure that they are somebody who I understand why they're doing what they're doing. They're not just evil for the sake of being evil or good for the sake of being good. They need to have reasons, and I need to understand it, even if maybe the reader won't. Hopefully, for most of it, it'll come across on the page. But though I do love a good black and white, like there's a dark lord and he's evil for the sake of being evil. Lord of the Rings, love it. But for me, at least for most of my characters, I need to know what the reason is, and the reason for why they are the way they are. Not the excuse that says, oh, well, all their bad things that they did, we can excuse them because the world was evil and cruel to them, therefore what they're doing is valid. No, they're still making bad choices. So for both the evil characters, who I'm primarily speaking about now, but also for the good characters, I need to understand who they are, and hopefully write in such a way that the reader understands why they are the way they are. The other part of the empathy thing is that it's really important to me that my readers come away better able to love like Christ loves. And I think that a big part of that is empathy. My main character in my Dragon series has a vocal stutter. And I picked that up in the character creation process after having watched a couple of things that had characters with a vocal stutter, whether they were a main character or a secondary character, and watching how either their stuttering was played for laughs, or that it wasn't played for laughs, but it showed that like everybody thought they were unintelligent or else not worth the time it took to understand them. And I wanted to have a character who dealt with that my readers could be in the head of and see, like, oh, people who have this particular disability are not unintelligent, and they are worth the time. And so I hope my readers come away from reading Elisa having greater empathy for people who deal with that in real life, and better prepared to love them like Jesus loves them. And even for the other characters who don't deal with specific disabilities or what have you, but just coming away having greater empathy for the people that we come across in real life.
Do you have creative goals?
I don't have a goal like I want to write 20 books by the time I'm 50. I do have story ideas that are bouncing around in the back of my brain that I really, really, really want to get to someday. And at the rate that they're coming out, and the rate that they're being created in the back of my brain, I don't know that I'll ever finish them on Earth. I hope I can still write in heaven. Maybe eventually I'll be able to get through the list. But we'll see.
So you have something to keep getting you up every day.
Yes, exactly. Something to keep me coming back to that blinking cursor.
Do you think there are threats to creativity, both on a general level and then specifically to you? What are the things that impede your capacity for creativity?
For me, a huge threat is stagnation. We already talked about how if my brain's not working and I'm not getting the words out, I need to get up and I need to go. And I need to go for a walk, and I need to get my body moving. So there's that aspect of stagnation. And then also the killing your darlings thing. I don't know just how clear I made it in my last answer, how hard that is for me. It's very, very hard for me to kill my darlings because scenes, characters that I've put so much work into that aren't actually working for the book that I'm writing or the scene that I'm writing or what have you. And I get so attached that I work around that scene and I try and make it work. And I try and make it work and it just doesn't work. And then I stare at the blank cursor and I think, I can't do anything. I'm stuck. I've stagnated because I want to keep that scene, that character so badly. And I've had to learn multiple times in my life, and I will have to continue learning this, just knowing me, that sometimes the best thing to do is to take that out and do something completely different. And even though it hurts, lo and behold, I can write again because I'm not trying to make that square peg fit in the round hole. It's gone. Write something new, and typically it flows better. So those are threats to my creativity.
In your first book, you have a certain scene with a couple of the dragons, and you had a fairly technical scene that one dragon was flying and the other one was kind of not having to fly quite as hard because he was flying in the wake or something like that. And I remember asking you about that and saying, how in the world did you know about that? And it was such a really cool scene and I loved it, but how do you know this? Do you have to do research? And you replied to me that actually when your father read the book, he said, yeah, that could never work. So my question to you is, when you're dealing in fantasy, reality to a certain extent has to limit what you do in order to make it believable. But how do you release yourself from having to prove these things actually could happen? How do you balance the need to make it believable and plausible, but not necessarily technically accurate?
That's a really good question. Wow. When I write, I try and have things as accurate as I can be for a world with telepaths and dragons and song magic in it. Because I do want it to be believable. However, in the midst of my attempts to make it as believable as possible, because like in that particular example, because the flying is not the main focus of that, like it's not part of the magic system that we're learning, or what have you, I find that readers are more forgiving with items like that, plus some think it's really cool. I've had a few people comment on things like that. I'm like, yeah, I wish it really worked. I thought it would really work until my dad read it. I won't point that out to people, so thank you for pointing it out to people.
Oh yeah, absolutely. You're welcome. What words of creative inspiration could you share with us?
Don't be afraid of doing what's already been done. Everything to a certain extent has already been done. In writing, there are so many tropes out there, certain types of characters, certain ways that characters interact with each other that have already been done. And I've heard a lot of creatives say like, well, I want to write a story like this, but like, enemies become lovers has been done so many times before, so I can't do that. I have to stay away from that. But that hasn't been done by you. And you are an individual with your own experiences, your own personality, your own voice, your own things that God is teaching you throughout your life. And even just like where you are in your life. If I wrote a story when I was in high school, it would be very, very different from me writing it now or me writing it 20 years from now. And so I think that fear of doing something that's already been done holds us back. You can look at a movie like How to Train Your Dragon. It's about the child of a chief of dragon hunters who wants to become friends with dragons and bring peace between the two races. You could say that's Songflight. It is. But I tell my version of that story very differently from that movie. Yeah, God has given each of us so much uniqueness that I don't think we need to be afraid of telling a story that's already been done. If you can think of something that hasn't ever been done before, awesome. Sure, go for it. But I don't think you need to be afraid.
When we asked you to define creativity earlier, you said making something new. And I was intrigued by your word choice, because a lot of people, as they define creativity, say something original. And you just said new. And when you take an old story and you put it in your voice and your way of presenting it, you're making it new. That's an intriguing distinction. New and original. I like that.
I like that you pulled that out. I hadn't quite considered. I hadn't considered that. I mean, I meant it all along. Right?
Yes, totally.
Well
That's
done.
exactly what I meant to say.